My name is Ryan Keller, and I live in a rented house on Birchwood Lane in Boulder, Colorado. The house had been exactly what I needed when I moved there 3 years ago. A quiet place with good light and reasonable rent, tucked into a neighborhood where the loudest sounds were usually just the wind moving through the pines or the distant call of crows at dawn. I did not think much about the house beyond that. I went to work, came home, paid my bills on time, and generally kept to myself in the way that people do when they have learned that privacy is easier to maintain than community. I had no particular reason to suspect anything was wrong with the place, and I never looked for evidence to the contrary. That was my first mistake, though I did not know it then. That kind of blindness is easy to maintain until the moment it destroys you. The diary appeared on a Tuesday evening in late September, during one of those unseasonably warm afternoons that sometimes fooled you into thinking summer had decided to return one last time. I had gone into the small attic storage space above my garage to search for a box of old tax documents, something I had been putting off for months. The attic was hot and smelled of dust and forgotten things, the kind of smell that makes you realize how much time has passed since you last opened a particular door. I had already found the documents when I noticed something that caught my eye in the far corner, behind a stack of cardboard boxes I had never bothered to open. It was a leather-bound book, old and worn, with a cover that had faded to a dull brown over time. I pulled it free and carried it down to the kitchen table, my curiosity momentarily overriding any good sense I might have possessed. The first page bore no title, no author's name, no indication of where it had come from or who might have written it. Instead, there was only a name written in careful, deliberate handwriting: Ryan Keller. My name. My exact name, written as if someone had known it long before I ever found this book. I sat at my kitchen table for nearly 20 minutes before I could bring myself to turn to the first actual entry. The handwriting was unnervingly precise, each letter formed with the kind of careful attention that suggested someone who had practiced writing it many times before. The first entry was dated September 15th of the current year, which meant it had been written just 2 weeks before I found the book. The words were simple, almost conversational in their tone, but what they described filled me with a cold, creeping dread that I cannot adequately put into words. The entry read, "Today Ryan Keller will find this book. He will not understand why it bears his name, and that confusion will slowly transform into something else entirely. By the end of the month, he will wish he had never opened it. By the end of October, he will be dead." I read those words again and again, my eyes moving across them like they might somehow change into something innocent, something explainable. They did not. They remained exactly what they were, a prediction of my death, written by a hand that had never met me, in a book that had no business existing. I told myself it was a prank, some elaborate joke that someone had orchestrated with far too much effort and care for it to mean anything real. I searched the attic again, hoping to find some sign of who had left the book there, but there was nothing. No fingerprints on the boxes, no disturbed dust that might suggest recent entry, no explanation for how it had come to be in my storage space. I searched the diary itself for some hint of its origin, but the pages were filled only with entries written in that same precise hand, each one describing events that had not yet happened, but were somehow meant for me. There were no margins, no annotations, no signs that anyone else had ever read these words before me. As I sat there in the growing darkness of my kitchen, I realized with a growing sense of unease that every entry I read made me feel less like I was reading fiction and more like I was reading a script that had already been written for my life. The night I found the diary, I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with every light in the house turned on, the leather book open in front of me, and I read every entry from the beginning, starting again with the one that named me, and moving forward through page after page of meticulous prophecy. The handwriting remained consistent throughout, that same unnerving precision that made the words feel less like something written by a person and more like something carved into stone by a machine that had been programmed to know me. Each entry was dated, and the dates progressed in perfect sequence, one day following the next with the regularity of a heartbeat. September 16th described how I would begin to lose sleep, how shadows in my peripheral vision would start to feel like they were watching me, waiting. September 17th described how I would stop answering my phone because the sound of it ringing would make me feel like something terrible was about to happen. September 18th described how I would start to hear things in my house at night, soft sounds that might have been footsteps or might have been nothing at all. By the time I reached September 22nd, my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely turn the pages. The entries were no longer general enough to dismiss. They described specific feelings I had already experienced that very evening, things I had thought and felt in the privacy of my own mind, now laid out in black and white, as if someone had been standing behind me the entire time, reading my thoughts and transcribing them into this impossible record. I went back to September 15th and read it again, and this time I noticed something I had missed before, a line near the bottom of the entry that I had simply skimmed over in my initial shock. It read, "He will try to find answers, and he will fail. He will tell himself this is fiction, and he will almost believe it. But he will keep reading because he cannot stop himself, because the need to know what happens next will consume him entirely." They were words that could have applied to anyone, that could have been written for any person, but the way they were placed at the end of the entry made them feel like they were written specifically for me, and for this moment, and for the exact thing I was doing at this very second. I closed the book and pushed it away from me, and I told myself I would not open it again. I went to bed, and I did not sleep, and when morning came, I found myself reaching for it before I had even gotten out of bed. By the end of the first week, I had stopped going to work. Not because I had quit or been fired, but because I could not bring myself to leave the house. Every time I put my hand on the doorknob to leave, I felt something inside me tighten in a way that made it impossible to turn the handle. A physical revulsion that went beyond simple anxiety and into something that felt deeply programmed, like my own body had been rewired to believe that the outside world was no longer safe for me. The diary had predicted this on September 19th, and when I looked back at the entry, the words were so precise, so perfectly aligned with what I was experiencing, that I could not tell anymore if the diary was predicting my behavior or controlling it. I called my supervisor and told him I was sick, and he accepted that without question, and I hung up the phone and felt the walls of my house pressing closer around me, as if the building itself had decided to hold me hostage. The entries had begun to reference things I had not yet experienced, and that was when the real terror set in. October first described a phone call I would receive from a number I did not recognize, a call in which a woman with a calm, measured voice would tell me that she knew what was happening to me, and that she could help if I was willing to listen. I did not know what to make of that entry. It sounded like salvation, and it also sounded like another trap, another layer of whatever was being done to me. But when the call actually came on the morning of October 2nd, my hands trembled so badly that I almost dropped the phone before I managed to answer it. There was silence on the other end for a long moment, and then a woman spoke, exactly as the diary had described, her voice calm and knowing, and somehow familiar in a way I could not place. She said my name, Ryan Keller, and then she said, "I know you've been reading it. I know you're scared. But you need to understand that what's written in those pages isn't a prediction. It's an instruction. And if you keep following it, you're going to do exactly what someone wants you to do." The line went dead before I could respond, and when I tried to call the number back, it had been disconnected, and the diary entry for October 2nd was already waiting for me, describing exactly how that call would end. The phone call from the woman stayed with me for days afterward, her voice echoing in my head whenever I tried to think about anything else. Her words had been so calm, so measured, so completely certain of the truth she was telling me, that I found it impossible to simply dismiss her as a prank caller or a mistaken connection. She knew things about me that no stranger should have known. She knew my name, she knew about the diary, and she knew what was written in those pages before I ever showed them to anyone. When I tried to call the number back, it had been disconnected, and no amount of searching online could help me find any record of a woman with that particular voice, that particular knowledge, that particular way of making the truth sound like a threat. I started keeping my phone nearby at all times, waiting for her to call again, but the silence from that number was absolute, and the diary filled the space instead with predictions that came true with an accuracy that made her warning feel more like prophecy than paranoia. By the middle of October, I had stopped going to work entirely. My supervisor left voicemails that I deleted without listening to, and eventually the calls stopped coming altogether. I told myself it did not matter, that my job was not worth worrying about when I was dealing with something so much bigger and so much more terrifying than any career setback. The house had become my entire world, the walls of it pressing closer with each passing day, until I felt like I was living inside a cell that had no bars. I moved through the rooms in a daze, checking locks and windows and doors until the ritual of it consumed my waking hours, and I began to notice things that I should not have noticed. Shadows that seemed too long in the afternoon light, reflections in mirrors that did not quite match the position of my body, a faint smell of something old and musty that had no identifiable source. The diary entries for October 10th through October 14th described all of these things in exact detail, and each new discovery felt less like a revelation and more like a confirmation of something I had already known but had been trying very hard to forget. I tried to reach out to someone, anyone, because the isolation was making me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. I called my sister in Denver and tried to explain what was happening, but the words came out sounding ridiculous even to me, and I could hear the concern in her voice curdling into worry about my mental state. She asked if I had been sleeping, if I had been eating, if I had talked to anyone about seeing a doctor, and I realized as I tried to answer that I did not know how to explain what was happening without sounding like I had completely lost my mind. I hung up the phone without telling her about the diary, because I knew that if I tried to describe it, she would think I was having some kind of breakdown. And maybe she would be right, maybe I was. But the diary was real, and the entries were real, and my name written on that first page was real, and I could not bring myself to pretend otherwise. The diary entry for October 15th was the one that changed everything, because it described what would happen next with a specificity that went beyond anything I had seen before. It described a door in my basement that I had never noticed, a door that led to a room I did not know existed, and it described what I would find inside that room. And when I read those words, I felt something inside me crack open with a terror that was not like anything I had ever felt before. It was not the terror of death or the terror of the unknown. It was the terror of recognition, the horrible sinking certainty that I had been here before, that I had read these exact words before, and that I had ignored them then too, just as I was ignoring them now. The basement door had been there all along, I realized now. I had simply never paid attention to it, had walked past it 1,000 times without registering its existence. It was a plain wooden door, no different from any other door in the house, painted the same off-white as the walls around it, and it had no handle on this side, just a simple latch that I had assumed was broken or decorative. When I touched the latch, it opened easily, swinging inward to reveal a set of narrow stairs leading down into darkness. The air that rose from below was cold and stale, carrying with it the smell of earth and old paper and something else, something that made my stomach turn in a way I could not explain. I stood at the top of the stairs for a long time, my phone flashlight in my hand, trying to convince myself to turn around and walk away. But the diary had told me to come here, and at this point, following the diary felt more real to me than the possibility of escape. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a small room, no larger than a closet, that had been finished with concrete walls and a single exposed bulb hanging from the ceiling. There was nothing in the room except for a wooden table, and on the table there was a stack of paper, and on the paper there was handwriting that I recognized immediately. It was my handwriting. The same precise letters, the same careful formation, the same style that I had seen throughout the diary upstairs. But I had never written any of those entries. I had found the book. I had read it. I had never touched a pen to paper in relation to it. Yet there on the table in front of me was page after page of words in my hand, and as I read them, I felt the ground beneath me crumbling away. The pages described the same events I had read in the diary upstairs, but from a different perspective, the perspective of the person who had written the predictions. And that person, the person whose thoughts were laid out in front of me, was me. Not someone who looked like me or shared my name, but me, Ryan Keller, describing how he had discovered the diary, how he had followed its instructions, and how he had eventually come to this room to hide the evidence of what he had done. The final page was the one that broke me. It was dated October 31st, and it described in precise, clinical detail what was going to happen to me next. It described how I would become convinced that the only way to escape the cycle was to start writing again, to become the author of my own prophecy instead of the subject of someone else's. It described how I would fill notebook after notebook with predictions that would then come true simply because I believed they would, trapping me in an endless loop of self-fulfilling terror. And at the very bottom of the page, in handwriting that was shakier than anything above it, were the words, "I don't remember writing this, but I know it's true. I've been here before, and I'll be here again. The only way out is to stop reading, stop writing, stop believing. But I never stop. I never can. I am the writer, and I am the written, and I will never be free." I stood in that room for hours, reading the pages over and over, searching for some flaw in their logic, some reason to believe that this was all an elaborate fiction, created by a mind that had simply snapped under pressure. But there was no flaw. The handwriting was undeniably mine, and the predictions were undeniably true, and the room beneath my house was undeniably real. When I finally climbed the stairs and closed the door behind me, I walked back up to my kitchen table and opened the diary to the last entry, the one dated October 31st, and I read it for the first time. And it said exactly what I already knew it would say. Ryan Keller will sit at his table and realize the truth. He will understand that he has always been the author and the victim, the prisoner and the guard. He will try to destroy the diary, and he will fail. He will try to leave the house, and he will fail. He will try to forget what he has learned, and he will succeed. And when he wakes up tomorrow morning, he will not remember any of this. He will simply begin again, finding the diary in the attic, reading the first entry, and believing it is all happening for the first time. I put the diary down and looked at my hands, and they were steady now, and I felt something shift in my mind like a door closing, and I could not remember why I had been so afraid, or why there were papers scattered across my table, or why my basement door was open. I went to bed and I slept deeply, and in the morning I woke up and felt fine, and the first thing I did was go to the attic to look for my tax documents.